So you need to be a lot more intentional about how you create that culture, and it needs to be actions, actual physical things need to happen, rather than kind of saying, oh, this is what we need to do.
Hello and welcome to the Truth, Lies and Workplace Culture podcast, brought to you by the HubSpot Podcast Network, the audio destination for business professionals. My name is Leanne, I'm a business psychologist.
My name is Al, and I am a business owner.
And we are here to help you simplify the science of people and create amazing workplace cultures.
Welcome back. Welcome. If you're on YouTube and you're watching on YouTube, this is hello. This is our third video we're doing on YouTube. We're still learning loads, so we've not quite got all the color grading and all the fancy stuff that we watch YouTube videos on and don't really understand. Not got that quite right, but we're giving it a go, aren't we?
We are giving it a go, and actually, we need to tap into our HubSpot network buddies. If you didn't know, HubSpot have recently just taken on their first cohort of YouTube creators for their YouTube network, which is quite exciting. So we probably need to get in touch with some of our new YouTube fam and get some tips out, right?
Yeah, good thinking. Talking of tips, I'm so bad at segues. Talking of tips, we are talking to an amazing guy today, Bernard Brogan. Bernard Brogan not only is possibly the most auditory and visually attractive man in the world because he's from Dublin, got an amazing accent, amazing voice, but also he is just an incredible all-round guy. Now, the background to Bernard is he's an ex-GAA football player, which, as far as I can work out, that seems to be like the Premier League, but for Gaelic football, I think. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, sounds right.
Yeah. One thing I didn't understand, though, was that even though they're kind of professional, I'm putting that professional not because they don't get paid. He was still an accountant at the time.
I mean, I'm not surprised that Bernard was the kind of guy that could spin more than one player once and be incredibly successful at both aspects. So yeah, I'm surprised that it isn't paid. I'm not surprised that Bernard made it work.
Fair enough. Now, Bernard's got PepTalk, which is a company which is growing, and we'll go into that in a second. But the focus of this episode is going to be around sort of mainly psychological safety, how to build teams, and the crossover between sports teams and teams at work. Leah, we last spoke, I think it was episode 15, to Stefan Wiedner. That was the first time I'd heard the term psychological safety. I honestly had never heard it before. Now, obviously, I think I hear it every single week because it's something which most guests bring up. For those people who've not heard of it, can you just give us like a 15, 20-second intro to what it is and maybe an example of why it's important?
Yeah, psychological safety is a shared belief amongst people in the workforce that they can express their ideas, their opinions, their views, their feedback without fear of any negative consequences, such as being embarrassed or threatened or harassed, even mocked. So psychological safety is the term that describes the environment and the climate within that environment that's been created to help people feel safe in expressing themselves. Psychological safety is really, really important in organizations. It leads to typically high levels of creativity, innovation, ideation, which is kind of intuitive, I guess. But commercially, all of those things link to higher employee engagement. They link to higher productivity, faster speed to market. Typically, organizations that enjoy high levels of psychological safety will generate more revenue. They'll be more profitable. They'll have happy customers. It's a pretty, as things go, as stuffs go in the culture world, it's a fairly fundamental thing to get right.
Fabulous. So if you're interested in that, then go back to episode 15, which is Stefan Wiedner. I will link to it I won't because Leanne does the show notes, but it'll be in the show notes. But it's definitely a good episode to learn more about psychological safety. Before we go and meet the man with the smoothest voice in corporate wellbeing, it's our favourite time of the week. It's the news round.
Cue the jingle.
So what have you got today, Leanne?
I have a word of the week.
Word of the week alert.
I just want to say at this point as well, I'm trying to look at you, but if I look there slightly, it's because I'm looking at Al and I want to see his reaction because sometimes it's funny in these bits. My word of the week, Al. Tribrid.
Hell.
Tribrid. Guesses.
Yeah, I'm guessing it's come from hybrid, and it's probably I'm going to guess that it is you might try a hybrid working week at work, but it's just like a pilot you can roll back.
Oh, that's a very good guess, but it's not the answer I'm looking for.
Is it not on the board?
It's not. I'm afraid it's not on the board. But a good effort. Tribrid. So tribrid is a term that I came across just this week, given by RGA Research to define people who split their working time between the office, home, and various co-working spaces or cafes. So basically what they're saying is workers like the connectivity and connection of in-person working. I would also say that there's no data, but my psychology brain would imagine that there may be more extroverts that enjoy the co-working in spaces that are their office. So basically, they like the in-person working, but they don't necessarily want to travel all the way into the office or have the interruptions from colleagues. So this gives, basically what tribrid is. And of course, as well, cost of living crisis, it may mean that we get well-lit, nicely heated, or indeed chilled spaces with reliable Wi-Fi. That is what tribrid is. People who work from home, the office, or various co-working spaces. Call me crazy, Al. I'm not sure this is a term that we needed.
No, I don't think so. I remember, though, having said that, when I used to work at home, I used to sometimes go to restaurants or not restaurants, but bars or pubs to work because I felt like I needed the people around me. That said, that's changed since the pandemic. I'm much happier just sitting. In fact, I'm much happiest not meeting anyone apart from Leanne on a daily basis.
And I think that is your little extroversion brain that maybe was kicking in there, wanting to be amidst the buzz.
So I was a tribid wanker.
Well, you didn't have... Oh, no, you did have an office. Yes, you were. Yeah.
I was a tribid twat. Anyway, so what else you got, Leah?
I have another business scandal for you. You may have heard PwC Australia got themselves into a bit of a tricky situation. Did you hear about this?
No, I didn't.
So PwC Australia, PricewaterhouseCoopers, as they are previously known, basically the headline is a number of senior partners at the firm used confidential government advice that they gained from various clients and contacts to drum up work from multinational companies to help them pay less tax. Yeah, not the most ethical or even perhaps legal thing to do. So PwC were forced to issue a public apology and stand down 9 partners pending the results of its investigation. Since then, an anonymous, that's a hard word to say, anonymous group of employees have formed their own committee. It's got a cutchy. It's cutch. Probably don't. Tell me, do you know what Americans, do you know what that cutch means? No? Anyway.
Welsh.
A catchy name for that committee. The Committee to Restore Trust in PwC through Transparency and Accountability.
That's accountants for you naming things, isn't it?
So they have stepped up calls for radical reforms within the business and also raised doubts at the independence of the internal investigation. A good example here of a lack of psychological safety with this group giving that feedback anonymously. So, it sounds like there's been a bit of scandal, and now even in the investigation, there's a bit of potential scandal there. It will be interesting to see what happens if there's any professional sanctions, criminal charges that do come, but what is for sure is the PwC brand as a whole are not willing to take the hit, having already sold that Australian government advisory business, the source of the publicity problem, for $1 Australian to Allegro funds.
Wow.
Yeah.
What else you got, Leah?
Moving on from anonymous to infamous, TikTok is a goldmine when it comes to understanding the latest workplace trends of our dear and very much loved from me personally, Gen Zers, my absolute favourite generation without a doubt. So this episode of News Roundup, Al, I thought I would add a little segment called TikTok Tales.
Oh man, I love it. The alliteration is just getting me a little bit aroused. I don't know why I said that.
Okay, so I must admit, this feature is inspired by the Tony and Ryan podcast, which is a very funny, also Australian podcast that put a lot of stuff on YouTube Shorts and on TikTok. And also I came across a creator called Kayla Avery, who is also making a bit of a name for herself for this type of thing on the talk. Basically, it's all about corporate talk. So it's basically, things like we're going to put a pin in it, circle back, run it up the flagpole, we'll whiteboard it ahead of the huddle on Friday.
Just reaching out.
Just reaching out.
Circling back.
But these creators are basically exposing the passive-aggressive nature of some corporate talk that we all understand and we use to passively aggressively maybe school our bosses, our colleagues, or even our employees. So Al, I'm going to read you some corporate talk and I would like you to see if you can translate it into real chat for me.
Bear in mind, I've never worked in corporate, so this is going to be fun. Go on.
If you've sent an email, you'll know. Okay, so corporate talk number 1, as per my last email.
Why the fuck haven't you done it already?
Thank you. Number 2, as you're aware.
You should be aware because I've told you at least 3 times.
I've attached another copy for your convenience.
You're a fucking idiot because you've lost the last one.
You are nailing these. Sorry if I was unclear.
Sorry if you are an idiot and you misunderstood. I'm sorry you're an idiot. Basically, it covers that one, I think.
I'm sorry if you can't understand this very simple thing that I'm trying to explain to you. Just a friendly reminder.
This is the 9th time I've told you, Kate. Get your ass in gear.
Oh, Kate. I recall that quite differently.
You're lying.
Mm-hmm. To put it more simply.
I circle back to my previous one. You're an idiot and you need something really simple to understand, which is why I'm making it more simple for you.
Oh dear. And the last one, this outcome is not a surprise to me.
I knew this all along and I told you this was going to go tits up.
I told you this was going to happen. Yeah.
And now it does. I want nothing more to do with it.
I'm washing my hands of you. Isn't it amazing? Like you said, you've not really worked in, well, neither of us have worked in corporate and you've not really worked in an office environment. And yet we all understand corporate talk, office politics. It is brilliant. It may be a game for you. Feel free to take those little statements there. Maybe play a bit of Corp Talk bingo this week.
Corp Talk bingo.
Yeah, if you get a full house, let us know. We'll get a prize. Maybe.
And don't be trying to register that because we're going to register that. As soon as we've come off this, we're going to register corptalkbingo.com and we're going to have the trademark and everything. It's going to be a great game. I love that. I loved that, Leah. That was one of my favorite bits of the news roundup. So shall we go on to the main segment or have we got anything else?
No, I'm done.
Brilliant. Loved it. So Bernard Brogan, ex-GAA footballer, ex-accountant, now co-founder of PepTalk. Well, why am I introducing him? Let's get him introduce himself.
My name is Bernard Brogan. I am more known for my Gaelic football exploits for Dublin GAA. We won 7 Sam Maguires or premierships, as you might call them in the UK. And I'm a co-founder of PepTalk, which is an employee culture and employee engagement platform.
There's something about the Irish accent. And maybe it's because I come from an Irish family, but it just feels like home, doesn't it?
It's like a hug through the years.
It's a cutch.
So PepTalk is a pretty impressive company. Here's just some really quick stats for you. So James and Bernard Brogan were the founders, the co-founders. They're both cousins. I think it's probably difficult to live in Ireland and not be cousins somehow. It started in 2017, raised over 1.2 million euros in 2021. Then they increased the team to about 25 more people and also won the contract with the likes of PayPal. Impressive. Further 36 million USD in investment to expand to the US. Now, I believe they've got 4 offices in the US. All fancy addresses on them. And then recently, last year, they were Deloitte's Technology Fast 50 winner. They were number 33, I think they were, which is a pretty impressive prize. So the whole point of PepTalk is it exists to improve safety, reduce risk, increase retention, and reduce absenteeism. So how does it do it? Very simply, it just measures, provides insights, and suggests actions. If you look at their website, those are the 3 key tenets of the actual company. And they do it via an app, which uses a combination of surveys, check-ins, early warning systems, all based on psychological science. I asked Bernard to give us that higher level version of what PepTalk does.
So basically, we surface back really simple, frictionless pulses that take 2 seconds because it's hard to get people to do anything, as you know, but we want to give them value straight away. So we're giving them relevant interventions for themselves and for their teams, and then helping people managers. You're a good salesperson, you become a sales manager. You're a good tech person, you become a tech manager. It doesn't mean you have the skills to be an effective leader. So we tool up your people managers to have the skill sets to have a hard conversation, feedback, a performance review, communication, clarity of your role. These things are just hard to do as leaders. We just help those be a crutch for your teams at scale across an organisation.
So what PepTalk are basically doing, just to make sure I understand, it's like an employee insight survey, but pulse, meaning just maybe a couple of questions sent out much more frequently than an in-depth survey. And they use that to create general markers for managers on how people are thinking, feeling, performing. Is that about right?
I think you've pretty much nailed it.
Cool.
The reason why Leanne's outlining that, it will become clear a bit later on, because we do have an app that's fairly similar. We're not in competition with Bernard, and we'll explain a bit more about that later on.
It's interesting that Bernard talks about how his experience as a high performer in sports has kind of shaped his vision for the company. And it's something we hear a lot about in psychology. We've heard from last week's episode, Kate Goodyear from Langer Rourke, who worked with the Team GB. I think we've had people in the past as well who have been athletes or trained athletes, and I think it is this understandable crossover that the psychology that is needed to engage people in very high-pressured environments to perform well is not going to be too different from the psychology we need to do the same for employees in equally high-pressured environment. So it is really interesting to hear how this has shaped his vision for the company. But what did Bernard see in sport that he knew could be applied to the workforce?
It was a story around the sense of team, and PepTalk's real USP is about focusing on the team and the manager, the two conduits to culture, that why you want to stay, why you want to go through the wall for each other. I had it in sport where left and right of me, I had my colleagues, my friends, my teammates, that we'd go to war together, and we would do whatever we could to help each other out and try and get over the line.
Bernard credits his old manager, Pat McElroy, for his enthusiasm for not only sports, but also just for generally business and entrepreneurship and really just making your vision come alive. I asked him a bit more about this story about Pat.
In my sporting career, I had a great leader, Pat Gilroy, who asked a lot of hard questions of me. He was a great business person. He'd bought and sold a couple of businesses, and he knew how to deal with people. He put his arm around some and he kicked some in the ass, which I was one of them. And some people react, as you know, differently to feedback and to motivation. And he just gave me real clarity about effective leadership, about how to bring people on a journey. And he felt there was more in me as a sports person, and he pushed me for about 18 months. I ended up becoming player of the year in our sport in GAA. The following year, we turned a corner as a team. Not that it was down to me, but he did the same for obviously the whole group. But you felt it was just a sole focus on yourself. That was the start of our seven All-Irelands, as I say, in 2011. He kind of really brought us together.
We talk a lot about leadership on the podcast, and we have had some phenomenal guests in the past talk about leadership. I think what Bernard's just done there is really kind of made the point that leadership is not about hierarchy. Yes, there may be a bit of arse kicking from time to time, but it's more about creating this shared belief, this shared vision, this shared sense of belonging. You know, to use Bernard's phrase, to go to war with each other. You know, that's hard loyalty. So I think it really just shows that whatever industry or world you're talking about, leadership is really, really important. And which is why I think for any leader listening, it's so important for you to invest in your own development as much as the development as your own team, because you are this figurehead that can really serve as a source of inspiration and performance, or you can be, the point at which it never gets off the ground in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as you alluded to before, we've had at least 3 or 4 people on the podcast who have been in the sports world, have now gone into business. And they almost all of them cite someone like this. I remember Kyle Denhoff in, I think, episode 23 was talking about a great manager, and that's what made him a great athlete. This is Kyle from HubSpot, a great athlete, and then on to why he's such a great manager these days, although not his words, but I spoke to his colleagues and apparently he's fantastic.
And I think it is a really good kind of an analogy to use or world to look at and kind of, draw similarities from. If we think about, like in the UK, football or soccer, one of the greatest football managers of all time, as much as it pains me to say it, was Sir Alex Ferguson of Manchester United. And I think he was managed, 19, 20 years, maybe longer, won them as many Premier League titles, FA Cups, League Cups, European Championships. They dominated. But you got to think, over that span of 20 years, particularly in the world of sport, where a career, if you're lucky, might last, 15 years? There would have been so much turnover within that team, whether naturally or otherwise over time. The constant was Alex Ferguson and that philosophy and mentality and expectation and vision. As a leader, you are the constant. Whether people are coming and going is kind of irrelevant, because you're the person setting the tone.
Yeah, I totally agree. So I asked Bernard a little bit more about the psychology behind both athletes and entrepreneurs.
I think probably high performance sport gives you obviously have to be driven. You have to. Why I became a high performance individual in my sport was because I wanted it more than other people. I trained harder. I did the extras on my own in the backfield, kicking points. I was a free taker. I was a striker. So I practiced and practiced and practiced. I wasn't as naturally skilled as other people, so I worked harder at it. And that's a similar thing for entrepreneurs, or for people, as you're saying, in coming from sport into business. They just have a mentality maybe to just work harder at things, or to be ambitious, or to not ask. A trait of high performance people, I feel, is curiosity and pushing yourself. It's not being happy in your comfort zone, always pushing yourself out there. Sometimes I tell myself, why don't you just stay in your comfort zone? It's a lot easier, but I think that's what we all need, and that's what we search for in sport. And some people get there, some people don't, but I think that's an attribute that an entrepreneurism or people in business that have came from sport will do well, because they have that go get it attitude, and will work hard at it, and won't accept mediocrity, I suppose.
Yeah, the psychology of entrepreneurs is really interesting, and particularly in terms of innovation, risk taking, pushing yourself, being very comfortable outside of your comfort zone. It's all things that definitely we'll see in the personality profiles of entrepreneurs and in high performance athletes as well. My word of caution would be, and I think Bernard is mentioned it there as well, is that, it's practice, practice, practice. I wasn't naturally as skilled as other people. And I think that's the case for any entrepreneur that is in a growing business, that has perhaps now got this brand new people element that they've not had previously, and may not quite have the same innate strengths to deal with. As we've mentioned before, people don't necessarily want a lot of change and disruption once an organization gets to a certain size. Your CFO certainly doesn't want you taking lots of risks all the time, or keep going in the pursuit of growth alone. And that's what we saw with tech recently, and all the layoffs. Pursuing that high growth model can have its dangers. So I think there is an element there of the practice may also be around kind of the more leadership behaviors and competencies you need to nurture as an entrepreneur in a growing business.
Yeah, absolutely. And just because you start running, you're not going to be Usain Bolt within a year. Don't be so hard on yourself. The fact that you've now grown your team from 5 to 25, you're still learning as well about how to manage a team. Now, one thing that has come out through over and over and again in almost every single one of these episodes is that just because you read a book about culture doesn't mean that then you're going to have a culture. Culture needs to be intentional. There's a saying you always say, Lee, and I've always misquote it because I can't remember exactly what it is, but it's something about culture is, do you remember it?
Yeah, the fact is you have a culture, whether you want to or whether you know what it is or not. You have a culture. If you have people within your organization, you have a culture, which is why it makes me smile perhaps when people will say, we're doing a big culture project that's going to, transform our culture, yet they don't quite have a clear understanding of exactly where their culture is now, which is why, tools like PepTalk and others are so important at understanding your starting point, so you can then go down that route of transformation. But yeah, whether you like it or not, you have a culture.
Yeah, and I think what's really important is that your culture will probably change as you scale. The culture has almost certainly changed. Your culture will certainly changed with the pandemic, with working from home, with hybrid work. So I think what's really cool is that Bernard's saying, regardless of what's happening in the external world, you still need to be intentional about your culture.
I suppose the world of work has changed. People are a bit dispersed. There's a bit of hybrids, a bit of flexibility. And so you need to be a lot more intentional about how you create that culture, and it needs to be actions, actual physical things need to happen rather than kind of saying, oh, this is what we need to do. So we're helping teams with those tips and tricks and actions and habit change over a period with organizations. I learned a lot of this through my own experience and working with the team and the psychologists and the experts about how do we actually take some of these lessons and give them through organizations and through team culture. You want to create a culture where you look left and right to your colleagues. You want friendships. You want that team experience. And it was just a story about that. As I was a free taker, I took the penalties, I took the scores, and probably got a lot of the glory. Even though I didn't do probably a lot of the hard work on the pitch. And it was about that selflessness, about obviously commerciality of we're an amateur sport, you don't get paid.
It's interesting how Bernard mentions that he often got a lot of the credit and the glory for his role, but it was very much a team effort. And I think there are things that, of course, in the public eye, there will be specific people that are celebrating. That's true in the sports world and the business world. It's why we all know names like Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg and Jeff Bezos. But I think what's really interesting is what Bernard said is that he didn't necessarily see that as his individual success. It was that team success. And it is, again, comes back to, that mission, whatever that mission you need to deliver, whether it's winning a football game or securing a new client. There is going to be that one person that might be the one that gets it over the line. But the collective effort that has taken place to get to that point has to be recognized and internalized as a team and by every member of the team to feel that their contribution counts. The key thing, I think, as well, that why we see these superstars in sports that do really well is something around the superstar effect, which we talked about back in episode 31, I think, which is why you shouldn't always hire superstars necessarily. So the superstar effect basically means that, and this was coined from research in the sports arena. So Tiger Woods, for a long time, dominated as the best golf player on the world. And what psychologists observed is that when Tiger Woods was playing in a competition, rather than raising the game and performance of everybody else playing, it actually dragged down their performance below their usual average or unusual level of performance for various reasons, where they felt intimidated. What's the point? And this can carry through as well in business teams. And the difference between a superstar that will be effective in your team and a superstar that won't be effective is the ability of that superstar to be coached. And as we know, there is no successful sports person out there who isn't able to be coached. So the other side of this, as Bernard suggests, is that you build a culture that centers around the team rather than the individual.
We all know in the tech world, there's hero engineers, there's big ego CEOs, etc. So there's some of that maybe take the credit or take the limelight. A lot in the last while, it's been a tough time for the tech world. So culture is a big thing to get around your people. Fundamentally, culture is about the values that you learn over time, and as I said, the team, camaraderie, the friendships you have, communication, the legacy of the sport you play. So all these things all accumulate in high performance, and we're trying to just pepper that through organisations, and they're doing a lot more in the UK now.
One of the things that Bernard talked about a lot there was trust. And like when you've got a sports team, of course, that makes sense. Everyone needs to trust each other. But also, it's got a really big impact in teams, in organisations.
It really does. And I think even more so now that we are seeing this hybrid working or tribrid working, is that, we haven't got eyes on our employees. We have to trust that they're doing their work. And I think this is where a lot of the tension between employers and employees is coming from, is that employees feel they can be productive working at home, and employers or leaders in particular feel that they're losing control. So I think trust is probably more relevant now, post-pandemic, than it ever has been.
Bernard also believes that trust is essential to lower risk of accidents, to increase psychological safety, and just generally to make a team work.
If you have trust from a manager and and a team, that will reduce accidents. You'll be able to come forward with challenge. You're not going to try and bury problems. That is what high performance is, and we try and layer that upstream piece of and the word cultural safety, psychological safety, the words that are coming out that we're trying to get after.
So yeah, the psychological safety that we feel to then be able to trust our managers, or trust that we can provide feedback without, any fear of negative consequences can be down to our own well-being. It can be down to the performance. It can also potentially be down, come down to life and death situations. I remember when we was talking to Stefan, and he talked about the work of Amy Edmondson, who's a pioneer in psychological safety. And they used the example of research done in hospitals with nurses and how the health outcomes or the patient outcomes were much higher in hospitals, healthcare organizations with high levels of psychological safety. Because as a nurse, if I think there's a mistake that's been made in terms of the medication that's been given to a patient, if I don't have that psychological safety to share that with my boss, which might be more than likely the consultant, the medical doctor, then I might not say anything. And that could seriously implicate the health of a person. And it's the same when it comes to workplace health and safety. So yeah, I think it is true. And especially, as we've said, people that are working in more isolated environments.
We do a lot of work in the EHS and the psychological safety, looking after your teams, those kind of deskless environments where people are out on sites or they're in a lab as a pharmaceutical organization. They don't maybe sometimes get the HR supports or the tools the HQ or the desk environment will get. So we really feel we can add a value there. And that's one we're really focusing on in the US as well, around that EHS. Psychological safety is the upstream incidences, accidents, near misses is the metric and the KPIs that the organisation use. Making sure that you have good relationships, that there's a sense of trust, that that is not, as you said, if it was this culture of fear, which is sometimes construction, like as you say, healthcare, these industries where you're just told to do something and off you go and do it. That doesn't give you autonomy as an individual. So that doesn't give you a psychological safety. You're always in fear. You're afraid to give your opinion. You're afraid to ask questions. Psychological safety is an environment where I can ask questions, be them simple or be them really intelligent. But you're in an environment where you are the group and the team and the organization is gonna grow because people are asking good questions. They're curious. They want to learn. They're motivated. They're showing up, and they're energized. And that's fundamentally what you want from a high performing culture.
Construction is a really interesting industry, I think, to look at psychological safety, both in terms of the impact potentially on our physical safety and on our mental health. We spoke to Kate Goodyear last week, who is a child psychologist with Langer O'Rourke, and she talked a lot about, the kind of the macho culture that can come about in a male-dominated work environment, particularly on site. For example, you may have times where perhaps your colleagues are maybe messing around at a point that they shouldn't, or, you notice that somebody is skipping a step in a safety check, but you don't want to say anything. And it's not just the fear of repercussion against your manager, it can be the fear of repercussion amongst your colleagues as well. So that's how it can see these ripple effects in terms of our physical safety. And I think in terms of construction as well, as Kate was saying, the suicide rate amongst the construction industry is really, high. It's disproportionately high. And that's often because of these male-dominated environments, very different social and psychological challenges that men face and don't feel as able to talk about them. Having this psychological safety with your manager, with your colleagues, can help you go, do you know what? I'm not doing great at the moment. This is going on at home. This is what I'm experiencing. Psychologically, it's what I'm finding difficult. And if we can have those conversations earlier, and as managers and as leaders, if we know what's going on earlier, we can nip it in the bud, or we can put steps in place to stop it from escalating. I'm not sure there's anything worse as a manager to have, I guess, one, felt that your member of staff wasn't able to come and talk to you, but also that it's now escalated to a point that it's really difficult for you to manage that situation effectively, whether it be in terms of somebody's mental health or even in terms of kind of a performance management conversation, if these things have been continuously overlooked from a compliance perspective, an ethical perspective, whatever it is. So yeah, psychological safety may, as a term, seem a bit fluffy and nice to have. When you start to break it down and start to look at practical examples of how this plays out in the workforce, it really is a significant thing that we need to think about. We need to focus on, not only for the performance of our business, but the literal, health and safety of our employees.
If you've heard Leanne talk before, you'll know that she talks about data. She's fanatical about data. The idea is that you shouldn't be taking any kind of decision or do any kind of intervention unless you have got the data which backs it up.
As per my previous podcast episode, I have mentioned the importance of data before.
Yes, absolutely. So you know what Leanne thinks about data. Some organizations think, oh, well, that's great. We'll run a survey. We'll stick it in a really fancy, PowerPoint presentation, send it to the board or stand up in front of the board and bosh, job done. Of course, that is not the case. Collecting data is the first part of this. Then you've got to look and see what else you do with it. So PepTalk have three sort of fundamentals, which is measure, insights, actions. And the idea is that you measure great. Of course, yes, you might have some surveys and some apps in place, but are they producing insights that you can act on? And are you actually taking actions on those? Bernard explains it's not just a tick box exercise.
I just think there's so much that the world of work can get from those high performing cultures and the values and layers that we brought in over time. And you'll all know, I see on some of the stands here today, like if this is a box ticking well-being tool, this isn't the stand for you. Like I thought it was lovely, one of the stands beside us, and that's like, there's loads of box ticking stuff you can do for culture and well-being, and it'll live there at the side, or you can try and actually enact change management and try and actually make a difference. And that's what PepTalk are trying to do. It's not easy because you have to engage your people managers, you have to engage your teams, you have to do things, you have to have a team talk once a month, you have to do these things that create trust. You can't just there's no silver bullet to this, you know what I mean? And good organizations have leaders who naturally do that because they're just natural born leaders, or they want to build a culture. The key for what we do is there's an action to it. Like there's loads of survey tools out there to tell you what you already know. You'll know yourself, there's a world of them, but very few of them provide the action, the relevant action to actually solve something. And that's what's really giving us energy in our clients. And we have to work at it, and it's hard, and we're building. But that's really our USP, and that's where we're getting our joy.
I love that so much. Measure, insights, action. And I think it's so important because yes, anyone can run a survey and pull up the results. Insights, and often why we need experts like Bernard and his team or me or the psychologist, is that you need to turn that data into insights. What does that actually mean? How is it all interconnected? And then the third point, action. If you don't intend to act on the feedback that your employees have given you, you're probably better doing nothing at all, because any trust or morale that you've built in asking people their opinion, and people have put themselves in their vulnerable situation, assuming they have this psychological safety. If you're not then using that data to make any change within the business, then that's just, what's the point? That's a real drain on our morale and on our feeling of psychological safety. As Al mentioned earlier, we have our own, culture tool called the RX7, and it is this hybrid of culture and engagement and well-being, much like PepTalk, but we're not a direct competitor. We work with much smaller organizations, typically under 100 people. And one of the things that we'll always make sure that we do is kind of pull out these equations for clients. So, if you've scored if you've scored low on resources, which means probably typically people will have high workloads and not necessarily the skills or training to do their roles. They're scoring low on resilience. They're feeling a bit low on energy, on positivity, on optimism. And then you're scoring very high on extra role effort. So people are going above and beyond and putting in the extra hours. That low resources plus low resilience plus high extra effort is more than likely going to result in burnout, because you've got people who don't have the resources or the psychological capital to keep going, but they're still, working above and beyond. So that's what we mean by we can take the data, so how we've scored on resources, how we've scored on resilience, how we've scored on extra effort. They're the data points. The insight is that those three things combined are predictive of a potential burnout problem later down the line.
Absolutely. And as Leanne says, the RX7 is perfect for you for but roughly 30 to 300 employees. That's sort of our sweet spot. I asked Bernard what the sweet spot for PepTalk was.
Yeah, well, the sweet spot is anywhere from over 100 or 200 up to a couple of thousand. We work with AIB Bank in Ireland at 12,000 people. We work with PayPal, which is another 15,000 people across Asia, US and Europe.
So regardless of who you use or what tool you use, please don't just rely on the technology to fix everything. We're talking about people here. A piece of software or artificial intelligence is never going to be able to replace these honest, authentic conversations, especially when you are scaling your teams.
But as you scale and you lose proximity of the people, once you go over 100 people, you start not being able to see everyone and knowing everyone's name. And now flexibility and hybrid has made it even worse again. So there's the need for, not just the need for tech, obviously technology allows us to do a lot more at scale, but just that nudging towards the behaviours that are traditional in nature, that are having a conversation more about you as an individual. What are you into? How can I help you get after your goals? How can we as a team have more better communication? How can we support each other more? Like, they're just human conversations, and that's what's been left out. It's like, how's the weather? Did you do it on the weekend? Okay, now onto KPIs and OKRs and sales numbers. So, I mean, that's the superficial what's happening, and we need to go a level deeper, and that's what we're trying to unpick in organisations.
One of the questions I get asked a lot from business owners is how frequently do I need to do this? How much is too much? If I do a survey every 12 months, maybe a pulse check every now and again, does that mean that I'm cool? I know how my people think and feel. I've got the data points I can crack on. Or is it actually better to not do any of that and just have conversations, because my organisation is small enough that I can have a conversation with every member of my staff regularly? Should I just do that? And the answer is always, it depends, and probably both. What we're talking about here from a science perspective is we're talking about quantitative data, so the numbers that we can push through fancy tools and statistics, and we're talking about qualitative data. Again, there's statistical analysis in that, but it's a much richer data point. And I think the point is to have a real holistic view of your organization and understanding of how your people are thinking, feeling, and behaving at work. You need both. My advice would always be a comprehensive employee engagement culture check survey every 12 months, pulse checks at least every 6 months. But as we've heard from PepTalk, we can do it much more frequently, as long as we're just asking a few questions at a time. And in terms of the face-to-face conversations, or the person-to-person conversation, or even person-to-team conversations, they need to happen as well. Even if you're using PepTalk and you're getting this consistent monthly insights, that doesn't replace the importance of you having conversations with members of your team, because it is that human-to-human interaction and connection that's going to help us build trust, help us build psychological safety. And ultimately, we need that psychological safety so our people will answer these surveys honestly, to give us that feedback we need to know where to make the changes. So it's almost like this chicken and egg continuous loop of a situation. We need to be person to person, human to human, to build the relationships that foster psychological safety, for us to then get the authentic data and insights we need in our surveys and our quantitative data to drive change.
As you can probably tell from the way Bernard talks, the enthusiasm he's got for this project is kind of infectious. So I said, what is next for PepTalk?
It's all consuming, and it's about, again, team. And we have a co-founder, James, my cousin, family. We're onto each other all the time, and it's just that journey, and all of the rest of our colleagues. It's just trying to achieve something that hasn't been done before, and we're doing it a bit differently, and it's hard. But the rewards, self-fulfilling rewards. Obviously, it'd be great in time if we ever got the financial rewards, but the self-fulfillment of being able to build something, to do a good job, to grow a business, to provide employment, all that type of stuff, is really what turns me on, as you say.
So let me take the pressure off you for a second, and let's just sum up where we're up to today. We've heard a lot of things, but we think we can sum up into really 3 sort of key areas that you need to take action in. So the first one is you need to do some kind of audit to get that data, to measure it. Whether you use PepTalk, whether you use RX7, whether you use HiBob, whatever you use, just ensure that what you're using actually will measure the right thing and also will return the insights you want. It's using a Google form or something, or a Google form to do some kind of engagement survey, is next to useless, because all it's going to do is give you a load of numbers. You really need someone who's going to be able, or an app, or someone who's going to be able to tell you what those numbers mean. So number 1, do an audit.
Couldn't agree more, Al. Data without the insights is completely useless. And of course, we hope that if you are an organisation over 100, you do use PepTalk. We hope that if you're an organisation under 100, you do use us and the RX7. But the point is, and I know Bernard agrees on this, just use somebody. just engage somebody to help you with this stuff because it is really important. And what that's going to help you to do is work towards psychological safety, or even understand the level of psychological safety you already have within the organization. And I think it's being mindful as well that could change over time with growth, with new employees joining, with older employees leaving, an acquisition, a significant change within the business in terms of an influx of customers. It could be anything. These levels of psychological safety can shift. So you need to work on it consistently. You should always actively encourage your teams to speak up, to share their ideas, to give you feedback, to tell you where the roadblocks are and where the risks are. And I think as a leader, extending this idea in terms of psychological safety, I think, an audit like this is one element. As we've said, those one-to-one conversations or human-to-human conversations are another element. And I think the third element as well, if you're really taking this seriously to foster this sense of psychological safety and work on your own development as a leader, 360 feedback tools are phenomenal. So that's when, as a leader, I will ask my staff to assess my performance. I'll ask my customers. I'll ask my peers. I'll ask my manager. I'm getting all of these different points to really understand how you're performing, how I'm performing as a leader. So I think if you really want to take it to the next step, I'd look at 360 tools.
So number 1 is doing an audit. Number 2 is working towards a culture of psychological safety. Number 3 is simply turn your managers into coaches. We're not in the 80s anymore. Managers don't need braces and cups of tea and shouting at people. It's not like that anymore. The whole point is that once you've measured it, once you've got your insights, you need to take action. And generally, in most organizations, it can't be just one person. It needs to filter down to the line managers. And those are the people who need to have human-to-human conversations. They need to understand that their job is to help their employees achieve their goals, because if the employees get what they want, the managers will get what they want.
Mic drop moment there. Wow, that was fabulous.
I'm not dropping these mics. They're about 300 quid.
Well, not this one.
Okay, so that is everything, I think. Is there anything that we've missed out, Leanne, that perhaps we should have talked about?
No, I don't think so. I think we've covered all the main points there, highlighted Bernard's work and the amazing tool that PepTalk is. I mean, come on, the names of people that are using it, this is a high quality tool. We'll leave all of the links in the show notes, both to PepTalk, to Bernard, and to us as well, and the RX7 if you are interested in learning more about that. If you're under 100 people, I know you said up to 300, Al, but I don't know, at that point, I think PepTalk might be a bit better, but that's why I'm not the salesperson.
That's it. I'm the sales and marketing guy, and so I'm always just like, let's just expand our total addressable market just by sort of maybe about 200%. But RX7 is currently in invite-only mode, so if you are interested, then you just look at the show notes. You can send an email to Leanne or myself, and we will assess your application and just see if it's suitable for you. Goodness, Leanne, that has been fantastic. And do you know what? I absolutely love the news roundup. I want more of these where we have to try and guess, or I have to try and guess what the things mean.
Do you like the Corp Talk?
The Corp Talk.
Do you know what? I knew we were doing Bernard this week, but I usually just kind of look through my little collection of things for the news roundup and just pick out the ones I feel like talking about. But I feel like actually I've accidentally aligned them really quite well this week.
Absolutely perfectly.
Yeah.
Brilliantly.
I've only just now got the PepTalk Corp Talk connection.
Well, I think let's pretend that this was all planned out perfectly.
It was all intentional.
It was whiteboarded.
But then we stuck a pin in it and we circled back to it a couple of weeks later.
That's enough. Say goodbye, Leanne.
Goodbye, Leanne.
Bye. See you next week.